Hi and welcome everyone to another episode of the Fireside Chat series, which is a series of conversations I have with different people about topics that I believe aren't enough talked about in the society, that may be considered taboo very often. And today I'm going to talk with Brionna Ned about the death cycle. Just a little heads up, we are not talking about actual death and the dying of a person, of like a physical body, but rather the death that every one of us experiences every now and again in life when we go through transitions, and which every woman and or menstruator experiences once a month, because we all go through the death and rebirth process often in our lives. So let's begin with a quick cycle check-in. Brionna, would you please share the day of your cycle if you track, and 3 words that describe how you are in this moment today?
So I'm on day like 21 or 22 of my cycle, and I am feeling I think energized, a bit emotional, and what's the 3rd word? Settled.
Thank you. I'm on my day 19, so we're kind of very close. And today I feel calm, focused, and also a little critical in my mental state. And I just love to have these little check-ins to say, or to show that we are different each day, and we can bring however we are to the table of what we're here to do. And today we have this beautiful conversation. But before we start, Brionna, would you please introduce yourself, who you are and the work you do in this world?
Yeah, so my name's Brionna, as you said, and I work as a Death Dominatrix, which is all about guiding and supporting people through the death cycles in their life. My philosophy is that every time you experience a change, you experience a death. What was no longer is. And so what I really focus on is like, what do you need to do basically to create an intentional ending so you can have a fruitful beginning? Because I think in our society, we are very bad about cultivating a relationship with death, even though it's a really important part of the life cycle. And because we don't like to talk about death, we think it's, as you said, like a taboo topic, we tend to try to like speed right past the moments of death in our actual lives. And because of that, like, I think it creates a lot of baggage. And what I see a lot in my work is that things that people thought they were finished with or were over, they come up over and over again. And we end up repeating the same cycles individually and collectively because we try to skip over this really big part of our life cycle, which is death. And we don't tend to it in the way that we ought to. And so my work is all about that tending.
And I love that you speak so openly about that, because for some people it's even hard to say the word death. And I mean, after all, we are all of nature, and nature has winter as well, which is a death, because the leaves are falling down, everything is dying. And at the same time, something new is preparing itself, and you've hinted at that with your work. So I know that you work with the death cycle. Would you maybe explain a little bit what the death cycle is, what are your thoughts on that? And I believe you have got like some tips on how you can find out whether or not you're in a death cycle right now.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is that a death cycle always initiates when you experience a change, right? And so what that means is that like we actually constantly have death cycles going on. It's just that some of them are much larger than other ones and impact us in bigger ways than other ones. And sometimes a few or a couple of them actually intersect, and that can make a big impact. But usually what happens is that you're living life and then like you kind of don't notice right away. It takes a minute to catch on where you're like, oh, I think everything might be completely different. And what I always say is what that feels like, and how you might start to notice or get some clues that like you're really maybe kind of in a bigger death cycle and it needs some of your attention, is that like your anxiety is going through the roof. I think that like that's the number one thing I always see is that people are like, I just have been really anxious, more so than usual, and I don't know what that's about. And what it's about is like underneath the anxiety is a lot of fear. And the anxiety is coming from this desire to keep things the same because you don't know like what the outcome is. Essentially, if you like submit to the change that just happened in your life, if you surrender to that change, you don't know what the outcome is. And so that's really like when people meet me, I coin it as like there's 4 stages of the death cycle. And the first stage I always say is denial. Like you're pretending like whatever change happened didn't happen and like trying to go about life as usual. And the clue about that is that with your life, the way you approach life as usual is not working for some reason, and you're deeply uncomfortable and usually have a lot of anxiety. The next stage is an ego death, which is from my teaching and my lineage of teachers is all about the ego is really the part of you that makes decisions and perceives the world based on past experiences. And so the ego death is critical because until like you can get beyond that stage, it's just saying like, we don't know what's coming, we don't know what's coming, we don't know what's coming. And so let's focus on the past and trying to see if there's something from our past that we can like align with and now mold our life to, instead of embracing the change and what possibility comes with that. And so when you're in ego death, usually the anxiety shifts to predominantly fear. Like you get underneath the anxiety into the fear. And, you know, when I work with my clients, they're supremely scared. Like they're supremely scared to say the truth about whatever's happening in their life, like out loud. And something that is interesting and that I do with a lot of clients is that I will ask them questions and I will annotate, like I'll take notes on what they're saying, because they will say the truth. But then even when I read back what they say, what they have said to them, they'll be like, I don't know, is that like, I'm like, what do you think that means? And they're like, I don't know. And they're still afraid to say it out loud, even though they have already talked about it. So that's what it's like to start moving through a death cycle. And I think the predominant feelings that people have are definitely fear and anxiety are the ones that where people find me, they're in those states.
Yeah. One thing I want to maybe dive a little deeper in is like, of course, sometimes life happens and you clearly know, oh yes, life happened. Like, I don't know, you get fired or you get a baby. It doesn't have to be something difficult or negative, it can be something positive. But something happens and it's kind of visible. You can't really deny it. But to me, it seems like most people or many people that come to you, it's more these subtle changes that you don't quite realize have happened. Do you have some examples of what your clients come to you with, or like what kind of changes and deaths are happening in their life?
Sure. I think that a big trend right now is for a lot of people who have their own businesses just over the summer. You know, I work a lot with astrology as well. And so over the summer with like the astrology weather, if you will, a lot of people started to realize that we're feeling like trapped by their business. And felt like in some ways they were outgrowing it, or that they could be more expansive than they could be. But what did that mean for their business? And so I was having this conversation over and over again, where people were just like in this I don't know state, and having to deal with really tough things like, oh, maybe the service that they offer in their business is a trauma response and it's harming them. And like they like knew something was off, but they didn't really understand like what was off, or they didn't want to really necessarily face what was off, if that makes sense. So I have a container right now called Rebirth Your Business, where we're kind of walking through that process really slowly of like, what, like, let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation about this, like, discomfort and uneasiness that you're feeling in your business that just has to do with the fact that like you're becoming a more expansive person. Like, I think that entrepreneurship is one of those journeys where it's like, as you grow personally, then your business has to grow, and you sort of have to recalibrate with your business and create new calibration points along the way. And that just happened to be a thing that was happening with a lot of people in my orbit this summer, myself included. And so starting to recognize that and create space for that, where it's like nothing specific happened, it just starts to be a feeling like something is off. Like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore, or this is taking more out of me than it used to take out of me. And like, you know, everything from like, I procrastinate a lot to I'm having anxiety or panic attacks over trying to get this work done. You know, it was a lot of different versions, but all underneath the same theme.
Yeah, and what it made me think of is like, we often think when something like that happens and it doesn't feel quite so aligned or not as it used to, we have to make a major shift and our world has to flip, make it 180 or something, which feels even more daunting and adds to the anxiety that we already fear or feel. And sometimes all that's necessary is to make little adjustments here and there so that it can flow again into a different direction. Did you experience that with your clients as well?
Yeah, I think sometimes, you know, sometimes what people need is just like a small shift. Or sometimes what people need is like context. And so like what I try to meet people where they're at, and it tends to be that people who are already working with some sort of processor, whether it's a therapist or a coach or something like that, sometimes they don't have the context, meaning like the language to describe like or understand what's happening. And so like I have a 30-minute like introduction to death cycles like course you can watch, and I've had a bunch of people like take that course and be good, because it was like all they needed was just context to understand what was happening. And then, you know, going back to the like rebirthing your business example, there are people in that container whose businesses are going to look completely different at the end. And there are people in that container who are just tweaking, as you said, like making some like little shifts to create more space for themselves to maybe explore this new thing that they're interested in, but their business model and how they run their business as a whole isn't really changing that much. They're just like carving out space for this new, more expansive version of themselves to expand into. So it looks different for everyone.
Yeah, and while you say that carving out space, I think that's often why we resist for so long and let the fear and anxiety build up, is because we we think maybe it's not important enough, we don't take this space for ourselves, or we don't dare to ask for support. But having these kind of dedicated containers can be so powerful. And as you say, there are business owners from different stages and from different backgrounds, and some they can see how different we all are and how valid we all are.
Mm-hmm.
and that everyone's change process is unique.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's important is like just getting people to slow down enough and release the societal conditioning of like always forward progress, like keep moving forward. And something someone said in our last session last week was just like, I'm really starting to appreciate the idea of intentional endings, because it's not something that I've done before, and I'm seeing like the medicine in it. And to me, I'm like, that's great. That's like the whole point. That's the whole point of this work, is that like we have to put this thing back on the map, because this is something that, like, you know, in every culture, it doesn't really matter what culture you're from, our ancestors were better about intentional endings, and there were rituals around it and all of these things. And maybe the knowledge has been lost, but there are things that we can remember, and then maybe we can create rituals anew around intentional endings, and see what that opens up for us in terms of possibility. Because I think like a big philosophy behind my work, or a big belief behind my work anyway, is that like we cut ourselves off from our own potential and our own possibility, because everything's so messy, and we don't like to tend to messes. We like to pretend that they're not there. And so I'm like, you have to dive into the mess, because that's where the nuggets are. That's where the information is. That's where the breakthroughs are that are going to open up like new possibilities, and new ways of being, not just for individuals, but for the collective as well. Yeah.
And I mean, the mess, or just the unknown, right? This blackness that we all fear, this darkness. Some call it void, whatever you call it, this something that feels, or that seems so daunting when we look at it. But when we're kind of accepting and are in it, it becomes more like potentiality, like this opening up into, okay, yes, I could call it a darkness, I could call it the mysteries, and the mysteries hold potential for something new.
Yeah, and that's where, you know, all life comes from, that space as well. And so we have like a real fear of that mystery, but it's where like the genesis of all life forms comes from as well. And so we have to remember that.
Yeah. One thing that I remember from what you said before is this moment, and I know that from myself, this I don't know what I want, this building up of tension when you just look back. And as you say, the ego or our brain draws from experience, and as long as it doesn't have made a new experience, it kind of can't continue or doesn't want to. How do you support your people to make the leap of faith, basically, and jump into that and over this threshold of, I don't know, I'm afraid?
Yeah. So in that space, what I really teach is essentially nervous system regulation tools. So I call it tending to your physicality, tending to your mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual experience. And I, you know, have a bunch of tools. Like, I love to learn. I'm constantly learning about some new like health, wellness, mental well-being tool. And so I just kind of lay them out on a platter, and I like intuit which ones I think will resonate with which clients. And so I use different tools with different people and just introduce them to their physicality, because one of the biggest things is that a lot of people just don't have, I was writing about this actually the other day on a blog post or something, like a lot of people just feel like they don't actually have the tools to be able to surrender and flow with that kind of change. And so you can't ask someone to make a leap without giving them the tools. So the first thing that I do is to give them the tools, right? So, well, that's the second thing. The first thing is I give them context. I'm like, this is a death cycle. This is what it is. This is how it works. This is where you kind of are. The second thing is, okay, now that you know where you are and you've located yourself, now we have to talk about tools for tending to your physicality, so you can self-soothe, so you can create the spaciousness in your nervous system to actually embrace the unknown, because if you don't have the spaciousness, you can't do it. And so let's talk about how you settle your nervous system. Let's talk about like the truth of what's happening for you mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. Like, where are you at with those things? Which of those 4 components of your physicality do you have the easiest access to? Which one feels the most difficult to access? And then let's start implementing some tools and exercises for you to cultivate a relationship with those parts of you. And so that's where people start to create the spaciousness and, you know, settle their nervous systems so that they can actually shift into that next stage, which I call resolve, which is where you really start to just accept where you are and surrender to what's happening. And maybe you don't know what's going on, but like you also know it's gonna be okay. Like it's gonna get figured out eventually. So that's the biggest thing that I do, is that I equip them with tools that I want them to take, you know, with them beyond our work together, so that anytime they find themselves in a similar situation, they know what to do. They know how to tend to their physicality so that they can get to resolve faster, because all of the suffering happens in those first 2 stages. And so it's like, how can we minimize the suffering? And it's like about like really knowing how to tend to your physicality and having that relationship with yourself, because once you're there, you can really minimize your suffering, get to resolve faster, and get like essentially, you know, on whatever your new path is faster as well.
Yeah. And it's also, you're helping them to develop this deep trust that many of us, in the ways we have been raised or just the messages we get from culture, we don't trust ourselves, and that we do actually have everything we need already inside us. And you help them like tap into that trust again, and trusting themselves and trusting the process, which of course can be hard. And I love that you're doing so much nervous system healing work, because I too believe that like in order to expand or evolve, we need to come from a place of feeling safe. You can't evolve and expand when you are already agitated and in this state of fear. We always have to come back to a place where we feel like, okay, here I'm safe, here I belong. And then we can take a step out of that comfort zone, but we always know we can go back into it, and we have the tools and resources in us, with us, to have us feel safe. Yeah,
exactly. And you know, just for me, I'm always like, you just can't push someone to get to the next step until they get to that place of safety within themselves. Like, it's just not going to happen, like neurologically, scientifically, like it's not happening. They can do their best to fake it for you, but you know, as a practitioner, like that is something that I'm always looking for, where I'm like, you know, I'm waiting, and it takes however long it takes. Some people are really quick, some take a much longer time, and you just have to wait because you can't force someone to get there. They have to get there on their own. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And in a world that tells us we have to get there faster, best yesterday, and they have these beliefs in them as well. And for me, like my whole work is also based in this going at the pace of your own body, of your system, of your nervous system, probably like the slowest part of you. That's the pace you need to move at, and you will arrive where you want to go faster if you go slower.
Yes.
Sounds paradoxical.
Yeah. And one of the things, it's so funny that you say that, because I always talk about the slowest part of a person. And one of the most important tool that I arm people with is having a relationship with their slowest part. Because usually, right, with all of our conditioning, like we've been conditioned to bury that part of us. And so most people don't have a relationship with that part of them. And so a big part of the tools in tending to your physicality is actually locating that part of you and tuning in and, doing some work with your psyche of like repairing that relationship. And then tuning into what it has to say and how it wants to move. And that's usually a pretty big adjustment for a lot of people.
Yeah. In case there is someone listening wanting to get in touch with you and have you help them move through their death and rebirth cycle, where can they find you? How can they contact you, or what's your preferred way of being contacted?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways. My favorite way is probably a contact form submission on my website. So I'm sure you'll include it in the notes, but my website's brionnaned.com. And I have a contact form submission for anyone who has questions. If you're looking for one-on-one programming, you can sort of browse through my website, and I have some applications for, one-on-one programs, or you can get a session, whatever. But I'm also just Death Dominatrix on all platforms. So you can find me on Instagram or TikTok or Twitter. I don't know where DMs are on TikTok, so good luck with that. But you can DM me on Instagram and Twitter, and I'll usually respond. I don't even know if that's a thing on TikTok, but I'm learning. So all of those ways are ways to contact me.
And I just love this name, Death Dominatrix. It's kind of, yes, I want that.
Yeah, it's really fun. I had a friend actually who, when I was like forming this or becoming this, she actually called me. She was like, "Oh, you're like a spiritual dominatrix. You're for people who sort of need to be slapped around spiritually a bit." And it just stuck. And then I was looking through some old journal entries, and I was talking a lot about death and rebirth cycles. And I was like, maybe it's the Death Dominatrix. So that's kind of where it came from. And all of my astrology, the numerology of my birthday, all of it weirdly aligns with this title. Everything, like the numerology of my birthday is September 19th, which is like a cycle of death, rebirth, death with 9-1.
Oh my God.
So I have all of these strange synchronicities like in my numerology of my birthday and all of my astrology. So yeah.
And we haven't even touched into the astrology side of your business, which would be very interesting maybe to explore in a different conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. But the main takeaway is that I use astrology. I look at everybody's astrology charts to see what's been going on. And it's kind of like my cheat code for like why is this person arriving at my doorstep? There's a few things that I look at, and then I also use it to help people, again, with that context idea of like, this is what's going on, and this is kind of how these things in your natal chart are interacting and what's been happening for you, and just to like validate, you know, what they're feeling and what they're experiencing.
Yeah, totally. I do that too, not that extensively, but like looking at where's the moon, the sign the moon is in, and the full moon and the new moon, and what kind of themes might be coming up. So definitely sounds fun to me.
Yeah.
Do you have some closing words, like, for example, your message to the world or something that you feel needs to be shared today?
You know, my work is really motivated by the late and great Bell Hooks, who is a huge inspiration to me, and a belief statement about love, which is that I believe that life is a series of choices between fear and genocide, and life and love. And what my work is really about is that I think that if our life was one big decision tree, we have all of these things, like we're missing the love and life side of the decision tree. Like we're very far down on the fear and genocide, and we've been conditioned to choose genocide or death for ourselves in these fast and slow ways. And so my work is just about awakening people's consciousness to the fact that there's this whole other side of the decision tree that's all about choosing love of self and others and life, that we have to put back on the map. And so that is what drives me. That's what my work is about. That's the philosophy that I always come back to, is like, am I really teaching people, helping them awaken this other side of the decision tree, so that as a collective, even if it's just one person at a time, we start to recognize and understand what it is to be living in love and be choosing life over and over again, as opposed to what we've been conditioned to choose for so very long.
Wow. Yes. Yes to that. And then I will close with coming back to the cycle check-in we had in the beginning. If you, dear listener or watcher, do these cycle check-ins for yourself and say these 3 words that express you today, let the last question be, and what is one loving thing I can do for myself to honor that in my day today?
Yes, I love that.
Thank you so much, Brionna, for being here. I will definitely link all of your website and social media handles below this video or below this episode. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was wonderful to be here.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.